Blake Shelton had it all: the chart-topping hits, the charm of a Southern gentleman, and a seat on one of the biggest shows on television. But while America laughed at his cowboy wit and sang along to his heartbreak anthems, Blake was silently drowning in a secret storm that nearly destroyed everything he'd built. He was the face of modern country. Until one scandal cracked that image wide open. Tweets that resurfaced, a messy public divorce, rumors of self-destruction. Industry insiders began whispering that the golden boy of Nashville might be finished. For years, Blake Shelton refused to talk about it. Until now. Because at 49, Blake just did something no one saw coming. He broke his silence. And what he revealed, it changed everything we thought we knew about him. But before we get to that shocking confession, we need to rewind. Because the road to rock bottom didn't begin overnight. It started with a love story, a microphone, and a smile that fooled millions. Before the scandals, before the heartbreak, and long before the Twitter storms, Blake Shelton was just a kid from Ada, Oklahoma, with a guitar and a dream. He wasn't born into fame. He wasn't an overnight sensation. He was the guy who played bars no one remembered, singing to crowds that barely clapped. But he didn't stop. Because Blake wasn't chasing stardom. He was chasing something deeper. Validation, escape, maybe even redemption. In 2001, that persistence paid off. His debut single, Austin, rocketed to the top of the Billboard Hot Country Songs chart and stayed there for 5 straight weeks. Country music had found its new voice. Deep, rugged, full of soul, a little traditional, a little rebellious, and America loved it. Over the next decade, Blake crafted hit after hit. Ol' Red, Some Beach, The Baby. His music wasn't just catchy, it told stories of pain, loss, stubborn love, and the kind of heartbreak you don't bounce back from overnight. By 2011, he'd leveled up again, this time landing a chair on The Voice. Suddenly, he wasn't just a country star, he was a primetime TV fixture, a household name. Viewers saw him as funny, approachable, self-deprecating, the kind of guy who'd drink a beer with you after the show. He became the coach everyone rooted for, the cowboy with charisma, the good old boy done good. But that's the thing about perfectly polished images. They hide what's really going on underneath. Because behind the smile and the Southern charm, Blake Shelton was unraveling. While Blake Shelton was climbing the charts and charming millions on TV, something darker was quietly bubbling beneath the surface. Fame can be a powerful drug, and like any high, it comes with a crash. For Blake, that crash came in slow, quiet waves that no one saw coming, until it was too late. It started innocently enough, public jokes about drinking, interviews where he'd laugh off his nightly cocktails. Fans thought it was all in good fun, just Blake being Blake. But those close to him saw something different. The constant buzz, the numbing routines, the late nights that started bleeding into the mornings. Rumors started swirling that his drinking wasn't just recreational, it was a coping mechanism, something to blunt the pressure of back-to-back tours, the weight of celebrity, and the emotional toll of a life lived on camera. Insiders said Blake was burning out. Fast. But country music has always had a complicated relationship with self-destruction. The line between honest cowboy and ticking time bomb can get blurry. Then came the cracks in his personal life. In 2015, his picture-perfect marriage to Miranda Lambert fell apart in front of the world. At first, the details were vague, a brief joint statement. No interviews, no drama, at least on the surface. But the truth? It was anything but simple, because while the tabloids ran wild with speculation, the breakup wasn't just a failed romance. It was the tipping point, the moment Blake's personal demons started bleeding into the public eye. And for the first time, fans began to wonder, was their favorite cowboy starting to lose control? When Blake Shelton and Miranda Lambert announced their divorce in July 2015, the country music world practically imploded. They had been country royalty, the power couple fans clung to like a fairy tale. 2 Southern stars, both at the top of their game, sharing a love that seemed tailor-made for Nashville ballads. But behind closed doors, things had been crumbling for a long time. They met in 2005 while performing together on CMT's 100 Greatest Duets concert. The chemistry was instant. There was just one problem. Blake was still married to his first wife, Kaynette Williams. That detail didn't stop him from falling for Miranda. Years later, he admitted he'd never experienced anything like the connection he had with her. It was electric and complicated. By 2011, Blake and Miranda were married, and fans thought the story had a happy ending. But fairy tales fade fast under the spotlight. Whispers of jealousy, long-distance strains, and infidelity started cropping up just a few years into the marriage. Miranda was on her own rise to superstardom, while Blake was becoming a network TV fixture. Their lives moved at different speeds, in different directions. Then came the cheating rumors, first pointed at Miranda, then at Blake. Both denied wrongdoing, but the gossip mill never stopped churning, and what made it worse, they were both using their music as an emotional battleground. Heartbreak anthems, veiled lyrics, pointed interviews. It all started to feel like a war fought in song. After the divorce was finalized in just a single day, no drawn-out court battle, no messy asset fights. Fans were stunned. How could something that seemed so real, so intense, fall apart so quickly? But insiders had seen it coming. They said the emotional toll on Blake was severe. Friends claimed he spiraled, drinking more, pulling away, isolating himself. It wasn't just a breakup, it was a collapse, a full-blown identity crisis. And when Blake was asked about it later, his words were blunt. I was at rock bottom. The golden boy of country music had cracked wide open, and the press was just getting started. If the divorce was the emotional breaking point, what came next nearly obliterated Blake's entire career. In late 2016, Blake Shelton's Twitter history came back to haunt him. Old tweets, some dating back several years, suddenly resurfaced. And they weren't harmless jokes or awkward teenage musings. They were crude, offensive. Some were laced with homophobic slurs. Others leaned into racist and sexist stereotypes. One tweet even mocked people with non-English names. It was ugly, unfiltered, and completely off-brand for the smiling TV cowboy millions thought they knew. At first, Blake laughed it off. He claimed the tweets were meant to be funny, blaming poor attempts at sarcasm. He tweeted, "Everyone knows comedy has evolved. I'm sorry if people were offended." But the apology didn't land. It felt half-hearted, dismissive. A PR band-aid over a gaping wound. Fans were divided. Some fiercely defended him, claiming cancel culture had gone too far. Others were furious, calling him out for toxic behavior and demanding he be dropped from The Voice. Hashtags trended. Comment sections exploded. Sponsors grew nervous. Behind-the-scenes industry execs were whispering that Blake was becoming too risky. NBC reportedly considered quietly letting him go from The Voice to avoid further backlash. And while that never materialized, insiders say Blake was warned, clean up your image or lose it all. But instead of laying low, Blake doubled down. In interviews, he insisted he wasn't a bad person, just misunderstood. I'm not politically correct, he said, I never have been. That line, meant to show confidence, only deepened the divide. To some, he sounded authentic. To others, he sounded entitled. The media painted a brutal picture, the down-home hero exposed as a fraud, the charming cowboy masking something darker underneath. For a man who had built his brand on being relatable and real, the accusations cut deep. And the worst part, they didn't go away, because every time Blake tried to move on, the internet dragged him back into the mud. And with his reputation in freefall, Blake started to question whether he could ever recover. By 2017, Blake Shelton's life was beginning to feel like a slow-motion implosion. What once seemed unshakable, his brand, his fan base, his sense of self, was cracking under the weight of public scrutiny and personal chaos. Behind the scenes, Blake was a mess. Multiple insiders say he stopped showing up to meetings, pulled back from press appearances, and seemed increasingly withdrawn. Rumors started to spread that The Voice producers were scrambling to manage his image while quietly preparing to replace him if the backlash got any worse. His music, once a staple of country radio, began slipping. A few singles charted, but none carried the cultural punch of his earlier hits. More than one Nashville insider whispered the same terrifying phrase: Blake Shelton might be over. And Blake felt it too. According to friends close to him, he began questioning whether he should even be in the spotlight anymore. One longtime collaborator revealed in an off-the-record comment he talked about quitting. Not just The Voice, everything, music, touring, all of it. He felt like he'd become the villain. The pressure of fame, combined with the backlash and the lingering emotional wreckage from his divorce, became a storm he couldn't outrun. And behind closed doors, things were getting darker. Though Blake would never speak about it directly at the time, several reports pointed to ongoing struggles with alcohol. It had always been part of his persona, a beer in hand, a shot on stage, but now it seemed less like fun and more like a crutch, a way to silence the noise. a way to forget who he was becoming. The man who once lit up rooms was now avoiding them altogether. He disappeared from social media for weeks at a time. Fans noticed. The energy was different. The spark was fading. He was in the industry, but no longer part of it. And then, as if the universe wasn't done testing him, another wave of gossip sites emerged, claiming that Blake had become uninsurable for live performances. Too unpredictable, too volatile. For a man who once joked about nothing getting to him, the walls were now closing in. And just when it looked like Blake Shelton was about to walk away from it all, someone unexpected pulled him back from the edge. If Blake Shelton was standing on the edge of his own collapse, it was Gwen Stefani who reached out and pulled him back. The pairing shocked fans at first. What could a glitter-covered pop-punk icon from Orange County possibly have in common with a brooding country star from small-town Oklahoma? But sometimes, broken people recognize each other. And both Blake and Gwen were hurting. They met in 2014 as coaches on The Voice. At the time, they were just co-workers with wildly different styles and, seemingly, lives. But then in 2015, something shifted. Gwen announced her own sudden and heartbreaking divorce from Gavin Rossdale after 13 years of marriage and rumors of betrayal. Just weeks later, Blake's own marriage collapsed. Suddenly, these two polar opposites were bonded by the same kind of pain. Their friendship deepened quickly. Away from the cameras, they found something neither of them had, someone who understood the humiliation, the loneliness, and the fear of starting over in public. Blake later admitted, "Gwen saved my life. Who else on earth could understand what I was going through except her?" By late 2015, the rumors were confirmed. They were officially a couple, and while many dismissed it as a publicity stunt, their relationship proved to be anything but shallow. Gwen brought out a new side of Blake. The sarcasm was still there, the charm still intact, but there was a softness now. A man visibly trying to grow, to evolve, to become better. Not just for her, but for himself. And fans noticed. Gone was the defensiveness, the barbed tweets, the hollow interviews. Instead, Blake started showing up with more honesty, more vulnerability. His music began reflecting that shift too. Songs like "God Gave Me You" and "Nobody But You" weren't just hits. They were open letters to the woman who helped him rediscover himself. Gwen didn't fix Blake. She simply gave him space to be human, to fall apart without being judged. And that grace, that quiet support, became the foundation of something bigger than just a celebrity romance. It was a full-blown image transformation. By the time they announced their engagement in 2020, the narrative had flipped. Blake wasn't the scandal-ridden ex-husband anymore. He was the guy who fell apart and then got back up. But even as he rebuilt his public life with Gwen by his side, one thing still haunted him. The world hadn't forgotten about the old tweets, the drinking, the arrogance. And deep down, Blake knew he couldn't fully move forward until he addressed what really happened during his darkest years. And in 2024, that moment finally came. In early 2024, Blake Shelton did what fans and critics alike had been waiting nearly a decade for. He finally spoke. Not a vague apology, not a tweet, not a brushed-over interview, but a full, raw, no-holds-barred confession that peeled back the layers he'd spent years hiding behind. It happened in a Rolling Stone profile that was anything but safe. The interviewer didn't hold back, and this time, neither did Blake. For the first time, he admitted it. He had been in free fall. After his divorce from Miranda, he said, "I was drinking too much, saying dumb shit and pretending like I was fine, but I wasn't." He described himself during those years as reckless, angry, and just lost. Not a villain, not a victim, just a man spiraling with no one to stop him. And then he addressed the tweets, the ones that had nearly wrecked his career. He didn't offer excuses. He didn't blame the era. He said plainly, "I was ignorant. I thought I was being funny, but I was really just being a dick. I hate that I hurt people with that garbage." It was the kind of blunt honesty fans weren't used to, and it hit hard. Blake admitted that at the height of the backlash, he thought his career was over. He confessed that he stopped writing music for months, that he started isolating from friends, and that he genuinely considered walking away from everything. "There were nights I didn't want to go on stage. I didn't feel like I deserved to be up there." But what changed him? Gwen. Therapy. And surprisingly, silence. He said he took months off social media, not just to escape the noise, but to figure out who he actually was without all of it. "It's easy to act like the tough guy when people love you," he said. "It's a lot harder when they don't. That's when you find out what kind of man you really are." And just like that, the narrative shifted again. Because Blake wasn't just airing his mistakes, he was owning them. He wasn't hiding behind a PR team or a clean-cut redemption arc. He was sitting in his own mess and inviting people to see it for what it was. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't beg for a comeback. He just told the truth. And in a world of scripted apologies and fake humility, that truth hit different. The cowboy who once joked about not giving a damn had finally grown up. But even more surprising, the world didn't cancel him. They embraced him. After years of scandal, silence, and self-destruction, Blake Shelton didn't just fade into the background. He roared back to life. In the months following his 2024 confession, something unexpected started happening. Fans didn't turn away, they leaned in. Not because they forgot the past, but because they finally saw the man behind the music. Flawed, honest, human. And that humanity became the heartbeat of his next album. When Backroads and Bruises dropped in late 2024, it wasn't the rowdy party anthems or radio-safe love songs people expected. It was raw, stripped down. A record filled with confessions, regrets, and late-night thoughts scribbled into verses. Songs like Wreckage I Made, Whiskey in Silence, and Better Man, Too Late weren't just tracks. They were therapy sessions, honest, vulnerable, and at times painfully real. Critics called it his most mature work yet. Fans called it healing. But the comeback wasn't just about music, it was about momentum. He returned to the voice with a new sense of humility. No longer the loudest guy on the panel, he started mentoring with intention, helping young artists avoid the same mistakes he'd made. Internally, NBC executives noted that audiences were responding more positively than ever. Ratings spiked. Blake wasn't just a coach, he was a story of second chances playing out in real time. Then came the biggest surprise of all, a duet with Miranda Lambert. When the song Dust Settles dropped in early 2025, the internet nearly broke. No teasers, no announcements, just a haunting, stripped-back track featuring two voices that once belonged to each other. The lyrics weren't bitter. They weren't nostalgic. They were real. "We hurt. We healed. We moved apart, but we'll always share a weathered heart." The track didn't just chart. It soared. It was closure, not just for them, but for everyone who had watched their love story fall apart in public. Industry peers took notice. Younger country artists started citing Blake as an example of growth, not perfection, not sainthood, just real messy growth. At 49, Blake Shelton had become something rare in modern celebrity culture. Someone who actually learned from their past and came back better, not bitter. He wasn't chasing redemption, he was living it, and for the first time in years, he didn't have anything to hide. Blake Shelton's story was never just about music, marriage, or missteps. It was about what happens when the image cracks and you have to face what's underneath. At 49, he's no longer the unshakable, beer-toting cowboy with a joke for every occasion. He's something rarer, a man who fell apart in front of the world, owned every jagged piece of it, and rebuilt not his reputation, but himself. He didn't ask to be forgiven. He didn't pretend to be perfect. He simply admitted he was wrong and chose to grow. In an industry that often chews people up and spits them out the moment they falter, Blake Shelton's survival isn't just impressive. It's almost unbelievable, because this wasn't just a comeback. This was a resurrection. But the question now is, will it last? Can country music truly embrace a man who once laughed off his flaw? Or is this just the calm before another storm? Because in Blake Shelton's world, the dust may settle, but it never stays down for long.